I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. It's going to be on HFSP Postdoctoral Fellowships, and we're very, very excited to be hosting this webinar as part of our International Grants Awareness Program, or iGAP, and you'll hear about that a little bit later in today's session. So let's get started. So here you'll see who you're going to hear from and who are behind the scenes as well. So today you'll be hearing from Guntram Bauer, Barbara Polly, Shubha Tole, and Anjana Badrinarayanan. I will introduce them as the session goes just before they come up to present their presentations. And behind the scenes, you have Smita Jain joining us. She's my colleague at IndiaBioscience. Manjula Harikrishna is joining us on YouTube. So those of you who are joined on the YouTube session, she's the one who's going to be moderating the question and answers there. And we're also joined by Bhavna George, who is a freelancer who was instrumental in putting together this webinar. And I am Shantala Haridas from India Bioscience. So I'd like to give you all a kind of brief roadmap as to what is going to happen in today's webinar, so you always know where your position and what's going to be coming up next. So after this, you're going to hear from Smita Jain. She's going to tell you a little bit about India Bioscience's skill building initiatives. Then you'll hear from me again, Shantala. I'll tell you a little bit about this International Grants Awareness Program, which I told you is what is bringing this webinar to you today. And I think that will be relevant in terms of the other opportunities that we will discuss. Then we will move on to hearing from Guntram, who will tell you a little bit about HFSP as an organization, from Barbara, who will initiate the main topic of today's webinar, which is HFSP Postdoctoral Fellowships. You will then hear from Shubha Tole, who is going to bring to you the perspective of a review committee member, and she'll tell you what makes a successful proposal from that point of view. And the last speaker for today will be Anjana Badrinarayanan, who will tell you about her journey. And after that, we will shift gears a little bit and we will move into the Q&A session. And all the speakers whom you've heard from, Guntram, Barbara, Shubha, and Anjana will all be part of that Q&A session. So you will get a chance to address any questions you have to all of them. So with that, let me introduce Smita. She's my colleague at India Bioscience, and she's going to tell you about our skill building activities. So over to you, Smita.
Thanks, Shantala. I'm audible, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so a very, very warm good afternoon and welcome to all of you on a Thursday afternoon. And it's heartening to see a good number of you have joined for today's session. So this session on HFSP Postdoctoral Fellowship is something, as Shantala has already mentioned, a part of our iGAP program. And I'm very happy that each one of you who've joined us here have taken time out from your respective, work in order to learn about this particular fellowship opportunity that is available for each one of you. It's the first step towards success, is what I feel. Before we get into, I know all of you are very eagerly waiting to listen to the speakers today, but I thought I'll very quickly give you a glimpse of who we are. India Bioscience has been around for little more than a decade now, and we really strive to catalyze positive changes in our life science ecosystem in India. And we do this through our different mandates that you can see on the slide. Networking, which enables, bringing together life science professionals across India and abroad on one common platform. Through communication, thereby increasing the visibility of Indian scientific research ecosystem and the opportunities that exist. And we mostly do this via our website. Education, in order to bridge the gap that exists between life science researchers and educators. Skill development, I'll talk a little more about the skill development program and what brings us here today with all of you. And data and policy, which strives to make India Bioscience a node for discussions on different policy matters. So next slide, Chandler. Okay, as I said, we really want to bring in a positive change, a change which would help each one of you to grow in your careers by various different means. So in order to create awareness and popularize different science careers, India Bioscience has been running large number of careers in science workshops, talks, online seminars, especially under the current times. Our CYC online is running at the moment. We also brought out a book called Disha, which is a very beautiful career resource uh, for life science students. And I would really request all of you to download this freely from our website. This would give you a very beautiful glimpse of what all it takes to build a successful career roadmap. Then we also have large number of talks, presentations, other books on our website under the resource section. So please make the most use of these resources that are available. In terms of the skill building workshops, as I said, we developed our Crafting Your Career workshop, which gives, in a nutshell, the tools that are needed to craft a career really well. So this has been a pretty successful workshop for us, and we have been running in person. And under the pandemic condition, we have moved this into an online session. We have had two sessions in last 3 months, and the third one is around the corner. We've also had grants writing workshops, again in partnerships or standalone workshops. The current, we got into an agreement with EMBO, and we just finished two grants writing workshops, one for PhDs and postdocs, and the other one for young investigators. In fact, the last leg of that young investigators workshop is going to happen pretty soon. We have also had scientific writing, journalism, administration management workshops. And these are all various different skills that are very, very important if you want to develop either a standalone career in it, or even if you want to continue as a researcher, these skill sets are going to be very, very handy in order to, have an edge over over others in this very, very competitive world. So with that, I hope that you all would learn, something from this webinar today, and you will be able to craft your, applications towards this particular fellowship. So all the best, and I hand it over to Shantala again. Thank you.
Thank you, Smita. So I'm going to build a bit upon what Smita was talking about. I'm going to tell you in brief about the International Grants Awareness Program, and just to bring your attention to it. And so if you're looking for resources, you will know that this is one place that you can look. And so the International Grants Awareness Program was launched with the hope to improve the quality and quantity of applications going out from India, specifically to international funding opportunities, because we felt that this was an area in which the Indian research community could perform better. And so to do this, as you will see in today's webinar as well, we try to create packages that address the schemes from multiple vantage points. So we try to bring you the voice of the funding agency, as in today you're going to hear from Guntram and Barbara. We try to give you insights from someone who's been a part of the review process, a review committee member. We try to instill confidence and boost the number of applications that go out by shining light on success stories from India or Indian awardees. And all of these different perspectives, we try to communicate it to aspiring applicants, grants managers, and mentors as well, because we feel it's important for them to know it as well and to take back this knowledge to their institutions. And now these resources are created in a variety of ways. Today's is an example of a webinar, an informational webinar. So you can see from the posters, we have hosted a few informational webinars. We also, depending on the kind of what we are trying to communicate, we also have shorter versions or a podcast. We have podcast conversations which are about 15 minutes long. We have informational articles. We have interviews, and workshops right now will again be in the form of a webinar or on Zoom. But when the circumstances permit, we will host in-person workshops. So we try to really like create a whole, an exhaustive set of resources for applicants who are interested in pursuing international avenues of funding. And I'm going to very briefly tell you what are some of the other resources that we have created. So this is a very young initiative. We started it in the end of 2019. As with all resources created by India Bioscience, everything that's created for this project is available, or this initiative is available for free on our website, www.indiabioscience.org. So what have we done so far? So far, we have touched upon the funding schemes from EMBO, and here for today's audience, the video on fellowships might be relevant. We have touched upon the Marie Curie fellowships, and so here we have an article, a podcast, and a webinar. And right now, we are working on the HFSP funding schemes. We've already had one webinar in the middle of September. Today's webinar is on fellowships, and this resource is going to be growing. And so the reason I wanted to put this up is firstly to let you know what other resources are out there, but to also let you know that this is a young program. And so we really invite you to interact with us, to give us feedback on the webinars, on the resources we put out, and let us know what you're looking for. And so you can do all of this by emailing us at iGAP@indiabioscience.org. And so I believe the links for the relevant resources that have been created will be shared with you in the chat box after my presentation. So with that, I'm going to end my part. And now I'm very happy to welcome Guntram. Guntram Bauer is the Director of Science, Policy and Communications of HFSP. And he's going to give you an introduction to the organization. Over to you, Guntram.
Thank you, Shantala. I hope I can be heard.
Yes.
It's a great pleasure and to have an opportunity to present the HFSP Fellowship Program. And we are truly thankful for IndiaBioscience to help us with disseminating program-related information. Let me just talk you through what HFSP is. In case you don't know, we are an international collaborative effort that exists since more than 30 years. And were founded by a couple of countries that you see on this slide. Operation started in 1990 with the first grants, and we are based in the northeastern corner of France in Strasbourg with an annual budget of about $57 million that is at our disposal to provide research funding. If we carry on, you see that here I put up for you what really our intent is. We have been given a mission in our statutes by the founding governments or the founding members of our organization to support basic research that presents innovative and cutting-edge topics that are sort of centered around the frontiers of knowledge in the life sciences and that really want to elucidate sort of complex mechanisms that are still not answered or that still pose barriers to advance our knowledge. In doing so, we are really focusing entirely on scientific merit in selecting applications. All of our programs have an international or intercontinental component. For the fellowship here, it means that you have to be mobile and move your postdoctoral research to another country where you have never worked before, and that all of the research that we fund is to some extent interdisciplinary, or that you do work on topics that would submerge you to new theory, to new thinking, to learning new methods. That's sort of the credo of HFSP. And for our programs, and Shantala and Smita refer to that, we have a research grants program, which is for when you have your own laboratory. Today, we're talking about the postdoctoral fellowships. As I said, that supports you to move to a new lab following your PhD. And it really is open for scientists from all countries. There are only a few strings attached, and so do consider the HFSP Postdoctoral Fellowship Program. Just to give you a quick glance, I mean, we are funding scientists from almost 70 nationalities, and it's really a global exercise in bringing this program to the global scientific community. And we've had quite a success because since beginning of our operations, 28 scientists that have been awarded an HFSP grant have gone on to win a Nobel Prize. And just yesterday, Emmanuel Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna were selected by HFSP and were given the HFSP Nakasone Award a few years back. And so now they go home with the with the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, which is well deserved. And with that, I'd like to hand over to my colleague. Thank you.
Thank you, Guntram. Thank you for highlighting the exciting opportunities that HFSP provides. So now we will move on to hearing from Barbara in a little more detail about the HFSP Postdoctoral Fellowships. So Barbara Poli is the Director of Fellowships at HFSP. And for those of you who are thinking of applying for this, she would be the go-to person for you to hear from and get in touch with. So with that, Barbara, over to you for a discussion of the postdoctoral fellowships.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Barbara.
Good, thank you. So yes, my name is Barbara Pauli and I run the fellowship program at HFSP. And let me first join my colleague Guntram Bauer in thanking the organizers for giving us the opportunity today to present the funding opportunities at HFSP for postdoctoral fellowships. Can I have the first slide, please? Thank you. So, as I said, or also Shantala introduced me, I'm running the fellowship program at HFSP, and there are two sub-schemes for postdoctoral fellows that I'm going to introduce in the next couple of minutes. The first sub-scheme or sub-program is called long-term fellowships, and they are meant for applicants who hold a PhD in biology or in a life science field and who want to propose a new project in a different field in the life sciences at the frontier of the life sciences. The second sub-program is called cross-disciplinary fellowships, and they are meant for applicants who hold a PhD from outside the life sciences, for example, in chemistry, in physics, or in mathematics, and who want to work in the life sciences. The general eligibility criteria are the same for both schemes. As Guntram already touched upon, you have to propose to work in a new country. So if you are a citizen of an HFSPO member country like India, you can propose to work anywhere in the world. If you are a citizen from a non-member country of HFSPO, you can propose to work in a member country. Both schemes, for both schemes, you have to apply within 3 years of having been awarded your PhD degree, and you have to have one first authorship paper or shared first authorship paper at the minimum. That can be in a traditional journal or it can be in a preprint server like bioRxiv. Thank you. The conditions and support are again the same for both schemes. The duration of the funding is 3 years. HFSP provides a living allowance. The amount of that depends on the country where you're working. We also provide a research and travel allowance that gives you funding for attending international conferences, for spending on, consumables in the lab or buying computers. If applicable, we provide child allowances and parental leave allowances, and we also provide allowances for relocation to the new host country or back from the host country. Our funding is rather flexible. For example, the third year can be used for repatriation to the home country or to another country after having spent 2 years in the proposed host country. The final year can also be deferred, which means that after 2 years of funding, you can interrupt the fellowship, stay in the host lab, and continue working on the project that has been funded by HFSP, but being supported by another means. And then you pick up the final year after 2 years of interruption. The success rate for both programs is roughly 10%. It varies a little bit from year to year, but roughly 65 awards are being made each year. There's one round of review or applications every year. The registration deadline is mid-August of each year. at which point you need to register through our website and obtain an application number. And then the submission deadline for the full proposal is usually in late August. But you can also find all that information on our website. So in the next 2 slides, I'm going to talk about what makes an application successful, or what you should consider when developing an application. From our experience, a competitive application proposes a basic research project that is creative, audacious, bold, and has the potential to be transformative and has an impact on the field and beyond the field. A competitive fellowship application also will broaden your expertise and will introduce you to new fields, theories, and methodologies. And ideally, it will challenge an existing paradigm in the life sciences, disrupt current ways of thinking. And if it's in an established field, it will ideally address a barrier that has prevented progress in this field. So what are some do-nots when developing an application? So don't propose a project that is only an incremental step forward, or that is a mainstream project in the host lab. Of course, a proposal will always be along the research lines of the host lab, but it should become clear what the applicant, what you are bringing to the host lab that makes this unique and different from other projects that are currently in the host lab. Also, don't propose a project that is or represents only a minimal or very small change from the research direction that you have been pursuing up to then. So HFSP is really putting a lot of emphasis on applicants changing the way or changing the field of research. Also, don't propose an application that fails to make your intellectual contribution clear. We are, of course, aware that you will be developing your application together with your host supervisor, but your own input should become very clear in the proposal. There are a few things that, or a few fields and topics and proposals that HFSPO does not support. We do not support routine or intellectually not challenging projects like screening projects. HFSP does also not fund research in the applied and translational fields, for example, clinical and pharmaceutical research that are aimed at diagnostics or therapeutical projects. Applied technology or purely applied engineering is also not within the funding scope of HFSP. And so are studies that are concerned with the production and yield in agriculture. Most environmental or ecologically aimed or ecologically themed projects or agricultural projects are also not funded unless they are about a complex basic mechanism in the life sciences. Also, studies of bioremediation are not usually funded, and studies on data collection and observational studies are also not within the scope. You can also not propose a project to work in a for-profit environment like a company, but of course, collaborations are always possible. For more information, I really encourage you to go to the website that you can see down there. This website gives you information on previously funded proposals or applications that will give you an idea of what is within the range of HFSP funding and what is not. You can also sign up for our newsletter by going to our website or by scanning this code down there. And if I can have the last slide, please. You can always email us, email me at fellows at hfsp.org. If you're interested in postdoctoral fellowships, if you are interested in more senior grants, you can email the grant office or go to our website where you find all that information. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for that really detailed breakdown of the fellowships. I think for anyone applying, that would have been very, very valuable. Move on to the next speaker. So I welcome Shubha Tole. She's a professor at TIFR, and she's also been on the review committee for HFSP funding opportunities. And so she's going to be coming from that perspective and giving you insights on what makes a successful proposal. So over to you, Shubha, and I have stopped sharing my screen.
Hello, everyone. Am I heard properly?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, so here's what I have to offer, and I hope it's useful. I really like that people are asking questions in the chat box, because one thing I find perhaps particular to India is that we hesitate to ask. So I should say that, you know, the people at HFSP are super friendly. And I mean, just ask, you know, you lose nothing by asking. So please go ahead. Okay, let me go to my presentation. Can people see my slide?
Yes. But
yes. So this is TIFR, and I say it, you know, sort of with some sadness, because I haven't seen the sea face for a good many months now. So, and this is me, just to give you a sense of my trajectory. I have been a faculty member at TIFR for 21 years now. And I have served on a few international review committees. So I'm collating sort of the experience of these review committees, most recently the HFSP, and what I have to say today, and tailoring it particularly to the HFSP proposals. Since the reach of the IndiaBioscience is very broad and international, I will keep my comments general, but I will make some specific comments for the Indian community based on sort of the applications I have seen for many things, not just HFSP, coming out of India, and what might be particularly useful to students from our country. Okay, I have a few slides. They're sort of broadly covering, reaching over 3 different angles. One is having the idea, the other is pitching the idea, writing the grant, and the third is recommendation letters. And I would say that the applicant, you, the postdoc or student, has control on the first 2. And the third is really the responsibility of the faculty. So if there are faculty in the audience, this is really important. And I think this is one area in which our country sort of needs to slightly, how do you say it, get with the program. Just in terms of how letters are written and what things they should cover. So I'm going to cover these 3 things. Okay, having the idea. You've heard about what types of things HFSP funds, and I would say that the most important thing is to do when you want to propose something to the HFSP is you have to dare. And this is something that's, I think, particularly hard for us to do from our culture. I think we are safety seeking. I think we have been trained, and we in fact make a very big sort of positive thing about picking safe things. Maybe it's because of our long past where, you know, there was significant deprivation and so on. So choosing a safe and secure path has somehow got a lot of positivity in our culture. And we've got to share this, okay? If you want to apply to the HFSP, and look at this whole organization, come together from many countries, is motivating people to dare, okay? There is something good that comes out of daring, okay? So I'll say, it doesn't matter if you've never done it before. Nobody's born having done anything before, right? We have much more courage when we're younger. Then as we age, we sort of lose the ability to dare, okay? As long as there's a good reason for doing it now, if you have an idea that's out of your comfort space, well, that's exactly what the HFSP wants. It doesn't matter if you've never done it before, but you've been trained in something. Okay, you've had a research training. A research training is useful in different types of research, even if it's a new system, or particularly because it's a new system, whatever you did in the past is going to help, is going to bring in a new angle. And this new angle is going to take a new field in a direction that it would otherwise perhaps never have gone. So the last bit of sort of motivation to dare is that, this particular combination of background and proposal is unique to you and what you propose, right? So think of how, if you don't do it, this particular path will not be trod on, right? Other people will dare other things, but this is unique to you. And that's what needs to be showcased overall in the proposal. So go ahead, try and get out of what you're used to, get out of the comfort zone, apply to labs whose work you find interesting, that you've read, that you would like to do, that might be different from what you know. And yeah, that makes it harder to write a proposal, but that's the learning process, right? That's what we are in science for, to learn more and to do new things. Okay, I'm going to now give a metaphor, okay? When you write a proposal, okay, we focus and we spend the most amount of time on the actual, what we call the meat of the proposal. The experiments we propose to do, the science behind them, the background, we will put a lot of work into them. And in this metaphor, those specific aims of the proposal, what you're actually going to do, are represented by these lovely rolls, these nice, neatly rolled, stacked up poster boards or paper, art papers that you're going to go to a store to buy. Or rather, put it this way, your reviewers are going to enter a store to go and get these posters that you have put there, because the posters are your proposal. But before your reviewers can even get to this section of the store, imagine if they walk through this. We've all walked through stores like this, huh? I can't hear people laughing, but I'm going to assume people are laughing. So imagine if the reviewer has to stumble through that or bump into randomly stacked things here and there in no particular order, or then walk through a section where the shelves are largely empty. If you go into a store, a large department store where shelves are empty, you're probably not going to go very far because you just assume that the kinds of things you really want aren't going to be there, right? And so on. If you walk through all of this before you get to the section where your proposal is, imagine the state of mind of a reader, a reviewer. Okay, so this metaphor sort of sets up the meat of my presentation today. It's that every section counts. Every single section counts. The science, the specific aims, what I've been calling the meat of the proposal in inverted quotes, is not the only thing that counts. Of course, it matters. Of course, what you actually propose is key, but every section counts. There is a section right at the beginning, summary of previous research. Here's where people describe what they did for their PhD. And I usually see people just patch in sort of hastily written, synopses or abstracts or something. Well, here is the first thing that your reviewer is going to read. How you describe your PhD will actually reveal how you think about your research. And this is one way of revealing what kind of a researcher you are. Why would you want to fritter away this amount of eyeball time that your reviewer is going to spend? Okay, now if you write something boring, I did this and I explored this and I did that, and because you just think this is a formality and it's not the real proposal, well, you've already tagged yourself as a certain kind of researcher. Okay, so don't lose this section. Every section counts, okay? And here's just an alert. Sometimes I do see a difference in writing between how the previous research is written and then the proposed project. And it's kind of clear that your mentor, your postdoc supervisor may have, only looked at the later section of the project and maybe, had a different amount of input in helping you write that. So that's a dead giveaway that you didn't actually write the proposal. So every section counts. It's something that you should pay attention to, and it should be yours. You can take all the input you need, but it has to be in your language, and it has to sort of hang together. Okay. Now, this is the section on information on the proposed research. So we have previous research, proposed research. The proposed research has all of these sections, and I can see that people usually spend time writing this middle one, the research project, okay? The research plan, the methodology. This part is usually the best written of the set, but the lack of a good abstract can lose a reviewer, especially if the reviewer is not right in the field. How there are maybe some 25-ish reviewers who read the entire hundreds, maybe 600 to 800 proposals. Now, how likely is it that there's going to be somebody right in your field, right? Usually related. I get a bunch of neuro or developmental proposals. So if you lose me in the abstract, I'm going to put in time and I'm going to do my best. But if you make it easy for me to get sucked in to the very cool idea you have, that's a good proposal. The questions on the host lab, why you joined the lab, I see people sometimes just lose it here, okay? The reasons you join the lab have to be carefully thought out and carefully presented. This is not just another run-of-the-mill proposal. If this section doesn't come through properly, if it's just, one of the many, many things your place, labs you applied to and, hey, you got a job here, that means you're not really that invested in your proposal, right? So write the section carefully. The intellectual contribution that you made to the proposal. Here, I find people from India sell themselves short. Okay, we're taught to be self-deprecating. We're taught to not appear to be taking credit. If the idea is yours, say so. If the idea is not yours, please don't say so, because your letters will corroborate or not corroborate it, and it can be disaster if you claim something is yours, which isn't. Okay, so tell the truth. But if you had an idea, go out and say so. It's not wrong. In fact, it's just stating what is, right? So your intellectual contribution is being asked, what did you add to this? So say it, don't hold back. And then why is this frontier science? This section, I think writing this section is perhaps a training and evolving experience, because we're so happy to be buried in our research that when somebody asks us, why is this important? Why is this going to take us to the frontier? It makes you sit and think and evolve thoughts about your research. So I think thinking about this section first will actually help you make the research proposal better. It sort of feeds on itself. So every section counts. Please do take the time. And now this third segment. Okay, so I covered having the idea and I covered pitching the idea. And now the letters. So for the faculty in the audience, and for students, if you communicate this to your faculty, or in deciding on choosing who will write your letter. Okay, so if your host supervisor is not enthusiastic about your application, it's going to show. If this person is not keen on supporting your application, it's going to show. This is not a run-of-the-mill proposal. I've actually seen letters like, so-and-so, and letters for candidates from India. So-and-so applied to my lab and has the right background, and I'm very happy to have him or her. Ooh, so this is important. Choose your host supervisor well. That's a whole different session, and perhaps a whole different webinar for IndiaBioscience, how to choose a host supervisor. Okay, and then there are two referees. One is usually one's PhD supervisor. It doesn't have to be, okay? It doesn't have to be. Now, this is a responsibility that we as PhD supervisors, guides, must take very, very seriously. Okay, writing letters for students is part of the deal. And I think, another thought for IndiaBioscience is really how to write letters. I think we need to gather up all the faculty and do a training session for them. Because the whole self-deprecating thing that we are trained to do, we pass it on to our students. We hesitate to speak about them as freely as perhaps we could, and then this shows. Each country has its own code. So when you see letters coming out of different countries, there's a whole code they come out in. But I think India really needs to have a code. Okay. What the supervisor says and doesn't say, the PhD advisors, both speak volumes, right? So if they say something like the person is well-mannered and polite, and they don't comment about the intellectual, sort of what the student brought to the lab as a PhD student, or how they led the work, or their research potential, this actually is code that the supervisor didn't want to comment on these attributes. So if you just say well-mannered and polite and you don't talk about the research abilities of the student, this is the kiss of death. I wonder how many supervisors actually know this. And I would suggest to students that they make a set of bullet points for their supervisor to go over, and that this is what I have brought to your lab in my 5 years, 6 years here. This is what I have done for this, and this project. The supervisor may forget. There are labs of 10, 15 students. The supervisor may forget who made this particular innovation that allowed the detection of this particular protein 3-4 years ago. So I would say if you've contributed to the lab in unique ways, give your supervisor this list so that they have something to write. And don't end up talking about being kind and polite and helpful and punctual. Okay, those words are codes that mean other things. Okay, the second letter. The status of the person you ask is really irrelevant. It doesn't have to be the head of your department and so on. It really should be somebody who really knows your abilities. A collaborator, somebody on your thesis committee who has engaged with you through your progress, somebody who has seen you evolve, who has seen you, achieve the intellectual sort of training that a PhD gives. Now, reviewers read hundreds and hundreds of letters, and the designation of the person who writes, unless they are not a faculty member. If the person you ask is not a faculty member, that we notice right away. Okay, and we wonder, how is it possible that this person did a PhD and couldn't find one more faculty member to write for them? Okay. So asking somebody who's a postdoc colleague and so on is not as good an idea, but somebody who really knows your work and who is an independent researcher is a good idea to ask. Okay, so I think I have taken my 10 minutes and I'm going to leave you again with this metaphor. Okay, make it easy for the reviewer to find your poster in this rack. And please don't have them wander through. So now you get the metaphor, right? If a section is not well fleshed out, that's this half empty section. And if a section is messy and the thoughts are out of order, that's this section, and so on and so on. All right. Thank you very much. Hope that was helpful. I see some questions in the chat box. I will look at them.
Thank you very much, Shubha, for that behind the scenes input into what goes into making a successful application. We'll now move on to hearing from Anjana Patrinarayanan, who's an assistant professor at NCBS, and she's also the holder of or been awarded multiple HFSP funds. And she's going to be talking about her journey with HFSP funding. So for all those of you who said you don't know someone in your immediate scientific circle, here you will hear from Anjana. So over to you, Anjana.
Thanks, Shantala. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I don't have any slides. I thought what I'll do is spend a few minutes telling you guys about my journey and the support that HFSP has provided me through this journey. I think Shubha, Barbara, and Guntram covered quite nicely the various aspects of the fellowship application. So what I'll touch upon really is what I kept in mind when I put the application together, and then when we have our Q&A session, maybe we can discuss some of these in more detail. Right, so I thought I'll tell you a little bit about my background. So basically where I did my undergrad, my postgraduate degrees, and then postdoctoral research and the various steps along the way. So I did my bachelor's in biochemistry from Ethiraj College at the University of Madras. And then I did a master's in biology from the University of Oxford, followed by a PhD in a combination of microbiology and cell biology, again at Oxford, with David Sherratt, who was my mentor. Post my PhD, and I'll touch upon this soon after I give you this trajectory, I did postdoctoral research with Michael Laub at MIT in Boston. And since 2017, I've been at the National Center for Biological Sciences, running an independent research group. So what is my trajectory, right? So the two places where HFSP sort of fits in and gave me tremendous support during my scientific career was first during my postdoc, which I conducted in Michael Laub's lab. As I said, HFSP supported me with a long-term fellowship for 3 years there. And before, I was, I think, one of the last recipients of the Career Development Award that is open to members, the people who got the long-term fellowship. And so my lab is actually quite well supported by this award as well. And so I'm super grateful to HFSP for, for taking the chance and supporting me through 2 phases of my career, and 2 very important phases of my career. So how do you approach the long-term fellowship, right? So I can only tell you how I approached it, and of course everybody has a different way of getting there. So just to give you the timeline, so I finished my PhD in 2012 May, and I moved to Michael Laub's group in June 2012. But I had interviewed with him almost a year before I actually joined him. So we had been in contact for a significant period of time, and we had discussed a lot of project ideas, although none of them were sort of sealed and for certain until I actually arrived in the lab. But it really helped that we had been in touch with each other for almost a period of 1 year, going back and forth on what I would be doing when I came to his lab. And I applied for the fellowship about a month after joining Mike's lab, and activated the fellowship 1 year after joining his lab. So I applied for the fellowship in the July 2012 deadline, and then I activated the fellowship in July 2013. And so why did I choose the Laub Lab, and how did the HFSP fellowship fit into this? So even before thinking about the HFSP fellowship, generally I think for thinking about a postdoc, it's nice to think about what's your niche going to be. I was very keen on trying to find an area of research that could be uniquely defined as something I could do for a significant portion of the future, and not just the postdoc. And I also wanted to learn new skills. So when I was with David Sherratt, I did a lot of cell biology, a lot of microscopy, but I had very little knowledge about skills that involve genomics, for example, and skills that involve other model systems. So during the PhD, again, I worked on one particular model system, E. coli, and I really wanted to broaden my horizons in different model systems so that you can have tools and techniques that can then be used to answer, fundamental questions that you're interested in. And so what was very important was to try and identify a clear question that was distinct from what you had done in your PhD. And this is actually, for me at least, a hallmark of the HFSP fellowships, and quite exciting actually, because they take a chance and let you do something that you've not really done before. And I think this is a great opportunity for you to think about, pushing your boundaries a little bit, and trying things that you've not trained in, but you think that you are willing to put the effort in and learn to do. And so what becomes very important then is to pick a mentor, a postdoc mentor, whose strengths you can really build on to achieve those goals. And I was very, very fortunate that Mike gave me the opportunity to join his lab, because he had skills and questions that he was addressing in the lab that I had really not thought of until I decided that I wanted to work with him. One was he was working on this really beautiful microbial model system called Colobacter crescentus that has a very unique life cycle. And I guess that's for a different point of discussion, not really now. But anyway, it was a very unique and interesting model system. And he also had a very beautiful way of approaching questions that were at an interface of evolutionary biology as well as systems biology, right? And this was nothing compared to what I had done during my PhD, which was really cell biology, mechanistic driven science in bacterial systems in E. coli. And so what worked out really well was we found this unique match where I could bring my experience with cell biology and microscopy to his lab, which was really focused on genomics and a systems approach to doing science. And so then the question became, okay, great, we've got these techniques that are aligning with each other, but finally science has to be driven by the question. And so I had to identify a unique question that would not just sort of be an increment to whatever is happening in Mike's lab already, but could be something that I find interesting and I am willing to pursue for a significant future. And here again, it makes a difference for 2 reasons. One is I think the HFSP program again really supports you in developing some of these questions that can become long-term questions that you can then pursue in an independent academic career as well. And second, in general, also it helps that if you're doing a postdoc, that you sort of build your own niche, so that you have a great relationship then with your postdoc mentor, who will be supportive of you taking that new niche you've built to, doing your own thing later. And so this is where we focused a lot of our effort in thinking about, what is that question going to be? And it really has to come from you. It has to be what you're interested in. And so you have to think deeply about what type of questions would be exciting for you. And these shouldn't, again, be incremental questions. They should be fundamental questions under which you can answer, something that can be of immediate impact and knowledge. And here you should actually work really closely with your postdoc mentor. It is important that there is synergy between what you want to do and what your postdoc mentor lab offers you as the ability for you to pursue, right? There's no point in you doing something just because the postdoc mentor is doing it. And there's also no point in you doing something just because you want to do it, but the postdoc mentor's lab can't really support you. And here's where, this idea that HFSP really supports is this idea of thinking big. Not the word you used is risky, but risky doesn't mean crazy. Risky means something where you are, pushing the boundaries of what you've done, as well as what you can do, and what generally the scientific field is at that moment. And so this is how we approach the HFSP fellowship. We wrote it in a pretty short period of time, but like I told you, I was in discussion with Mike for several months before I actually joined his lab and then finally wrote the proposal. We didn't have any preliminary data, and HFSP doesn't really require that from you. What it requires is you to have thought through very carefully about the questions you want to address and show the distinct nature between your PhD work and your postdoc work. Overlaps are really not the zone in which you get funded here. And so HFSP support is really fantastic, as already mentioned by the other panelists. I must say that they have a phenomenal grants management team. They are so supportive and responsive to any questions you have. And that's really a luxury to be part of. They also give you flexibility, as Barbara has detailed in her presentation. They help you define your own niche. And again, I keep saying this again and again, you really should take this opportunity to think about what your question is going to be, because HFSP funding really allows you to build on it. And so do apply, don't hold yourself back from applying. But think about your application really carefully. Choose a really appropriate host lab where you find a synergy of overlapping interests, but with space for you to do your own thing as well. And where the host lab will also be supportive of you proposing something that is really not in your immediate comfort zone. And yeah, finally, just really define your own niche that sets you apart from your PhD work during this process. And that's basically it from me. I'll be happy to answer questions in the Q&A further.
So with that, I'm going to throw the floor open to the question and answer session. As you can see, we have quite a bit of time for it, and I'm now going to hand it over to Bhavna.
Sorry, I'd just like to make a point which I think is very important for the Indian population, which I sort of skipped over. It is that the HFSP, to my great surprise, great and happy surprise, absolutely welcomes bioRxiv preprint server and accepts them as available and published, and they should count. So repeatedly, we've been told as reviewers that if it's available to the public to read, and if it's available to the reviewers to read, then it counts. You don't have to wait for your paper to get published. You want to continue, Barbara?
Yes, that's a good point. Thank you very much, Shubha. That's absolutely true. We do count them as regular papers. And that was also one of the questions that came up in the Q&A session. It doesn't matter how many papers you published and in how impactful journals or impact factor. I mean, Shubha will know, as a review committee member, they're always being told, don't look at the impact factor, look at the impact of the work itself. something that is published in Nature can be impactless. You know what I mean? It matters what the work actually itself has of an impact. It doesn't matter where you publish. And we really hammer that down to our reviewers to take into consideration.
And perhaps to the Indian students, yeah, there are big labs, often abroad that continue to crank out Nature papers. So when you see a Nature paper out of a lab that's always producing them, you really wonder how much the student has put into that paper. Whereas, so somebody asked, do you only look for big name institutions? You look for what the student has done and you look for whether it is available online. So I don't know how many of your supervisors are comfortable with bioarchives or preprint servers, but just encourage them to put your work out there and don't wait after that because it counts.
Yeah. And it also depends on the field. Some fields are just small and they publish in smaller journals, but the reviewers will look at the work and the paper and will say, well, for that field, that was a very impactful paper. And the reason why it wasn't published in Nature, Cell, or Science was that it is a small field, but nevertheless, it made a big impact.
And then you say somebody who has done that kind of work, which is very cool, now is putting their well-trained and creative mind into something else. So you look for the arc, you look for the arc and you see how this is going to be enriched by this. So, there's really no business here for the name of the institution or the name of the journal, because this is an individual trajectory that's being encouraged.
Thank you very much for highlighting that. It is the quality of the applicant's work, because that is one of the most predominant questions that comes across for all of these international funding opportunities sessions we have. I think now I'm going to hand it over to Bhavna to ask the questions.
Thank you, Shantala. Thank you, Anjana, Barbara, and Shubha for a wonderful talk. And thank you for answering a lot of questions in the Q&A box. Harsha has asked, how do we select a host institute, or will HFSP help us find a mentor institute? Over to you, Barbara.
Yes, thank you. No, it's up to you to select a host institute. HFSP cannot provide any help in that. It is an idea that has to come from you, and you have to find the right host to host your idea and your project.
Okay, another regarding eligibility, Barbara, from an anonymous attendee, can one apply when they have already started working at the host postdoc lab?
Yes, you can. But by the time you activate the fellowship, you cannot have been in the host lab for more than 1 year.
Okay. So another question for Shubha from Akila. Do host laboratories view HFSP fellows as an advantageous hire, since they might not have much experience with the system techniques? Is it easy to find a host lab?
Okay, thanks for asking this question. Our approach to thinking about HFSP has to change, okay? The host lab is not hiring a technician. If you were hiring a technician, you would look for whether they knew your techniques. Okay, the HFSP funds a creative mind that's making a jump. The host lab would consider themselves fortunate for having somebody who is creative enough to have made this sort of transition in a proposal and now has gotten their own funding for it. I mean, the host lab would count their blessings. Okay, so it's a completely different approach, right? I should also add this continuous theme of prestigious institutions getting HFSPs or, why is it perhaps that some labs or institutions might be more represented in getting HFSP awardees and so on? It's simply that they know how to write the proposals, okay? So the correlation is really in how the proposal gets written. And if you've been fortunate enough to be well-trained, no matter where you are from, and if you're fortunate enough to have a creative idea, where you are from and who trained you and so on doesn't matter, and who you're going to doesn't really matter, as long as that proposal itself is well-written.
Thank you, Shubha. Anjana, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think it's important to choose a host lab that's willing to take the risk on you, and not a host lab that just wants another pair of hands that's going to do what they want you to do. And I think this is a really nice way of also finding the right host lab for you, by making sure that they are willing to support you through an application like this.
Add something to what Shubha and Anjana said. If the review committees realize that a project is something that the host lab has wanted to do for the last 10 years, and that doesn't really reflect on the unique background and knowledge of the applicant, that is not going to be viewed favorably. So if it's a host lab project that has been sitting in the drawer of the host supervisor for 10 years, that is not a good idea, because that could be done by anyone. You have to ask yourself the question, what is your unique contribution that you're going to bring to the host lab? And that will make your application successful.
So sometimes there is, there's a sort of contradiction in what we're saying, right? On the one hand, we're saying go do something completely different that you haven't done before. Okay. On the other hand, we're saying, well, it can't be a host lab project. So the point is, you have to add something new in terms of thought process, insight, direction, or because I've been studying, I don't know, behavior before in ants or something, now I would like to see, I don't know, the mechanics of walking or something in some, a different approach, but linked to what, your journey, your thought process, the journey of your thought process, saying, I looked at gene regulation before, now I want to see how cells interact because of their gene regulation, or the journey is important. Right? You may not bring techniques, because if we're asking you to do something completely different, you would not bring a technique. And here the idea might even be something the host lab has wanted to do for a long time, but maybe they couldn't do it because somebody with something you hadn't come before. So there's a match to be made, and that's what I think is important.
Thanks, Shubha. Bilal?
Yes, thank you very much, Shiva, and thank you very much, Babara. So actually, I wanted to know that if when we start writing some grants and writing to the host, we are more often not getting the response from the host. So we have to write a lot to different hosts, but that ultimately to the as long as we write it for 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, most of the time, 99% of the time, we don't get the response from the host. At that time, what should be the strategy that should be adopted to convince the host lab or host professor that I'm interested, I want to work with you?
Anjana, would you like to start maybe touching upon your experience as well, because you contacted your host, or you got in touch with your host quite in advance, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I can give you an example of how I identified my host lab. This actually happened at a conference that both of us had attended, and we talked after that, and that's when I realized that I would really like to work with this person, and the entire conversation started from there. It can be hard sometimes when you're writing to people and they don't get back to you. It is frustrating, but I think it really helps to make sure that when you are writing, you've been so thorough with what you've looked at in the host lab, that the host lab really also finds a reason to respond to you. Definitely, when I approached Mike, I took time. I did not approach him soon after I heard his talk, for example. The meeting was 4 days long. He gave the keynote lecture on day one, and I spent the next 3.5 days furiously reading, because I was like, this sounds amazing. I want to work in this area. So 3.5 days is still not much, but you do some homework before you approach the person you want to get in touch with. And I would say maybe that is one way of going forward. Shubha has got her hand raised.
Yeah. No, so if you've written to very many people, sorry, if you've written to very many people and not gotten a reply, then your you are writing is not encouraging them to click on your email or read any further. Right. So if it looks like you're carpet bombing many people with, I just want to do a postdoc, any postdoc is fine, please choose me. There has to be a reason to pick up your email and spend some time reading it. So if you read their papers and pitch already to them how somebody from your background would, match well to their lab for whatever reason, or you liked a paper of theirs particularly, talk about it. Scientists are suckers for scientific discourse. So if you give them something to think about and engage, then they will read your email. And trying to meet them in person is another great way, because when you make face contact with somebody at a conference, they immediately see the person pitching the idea.
Barbara, did you want to say something in response to this as well?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with both Shubha and Anjana. Do your homework before you contact a host. Don't send general emails saying, I will, as Shubha said, I will do anything. It has to be clear to the host supervisor that you thought about what he or she is doing and why you would like to work with them. Don't just send out, mass general emails.
Thank you. And I think that's especially important when you're kind of proposing a risky project, moving into a different area, that people really see that you have thought about.
Thank you, Shantala. So talking about daring projects, this question is from Viraj to Shubha and Anjana. In your experience, are successful proposals generally daring or frontier because they propose to use newer technology to venture where past technology could not? Or is it almost always conceptual novelty that has been overlooked before, regardless of newer technology?
The question is what's important and whether you've changed your field, and technology is not the key factor. So somebody going into increasingly higher forms of technology, I gave the example of 3C and 4C and high C, isn't as interesting as somebody who's going from, say, bioinformatics to behavior, field work or something, which is not technology intense. So it's not driven by technology at all unless you can motivate it. In fact, if the host lab has already established a technology and now you're going, oh, I will learn this technology and use it, unless you have a good question, that's yours. That's not actually a very positive thing.
Yeah, and I'd like to also add to that when you're writing the proposal, it'll become evident that without a good question, it is nearly impossible to write a good proposal. It's very hard to build it around just a technological innovation or application of a technology to something. You really have to define very clear questions. And so, as Shubha says, it has to be question driven.
Thank you, Shubha and Anjana. Okay, this question always comes up in the grants webinars. So there's a question from Bhuvaneshwari to Barbara. Bhuvaneshwari is currently in a parental career break. It is a 2 years of break since her PhD defense. Will the committee take this into consideration during decision?
Of course, yes. We do take parental leave breaks into consideration. We do take health issues into consideration. Also times when you cared for an immediate family member who had health issues. This will all be taken into consideration. Just get in touch with us and explain what the situation is. But yes.
Thank you, Barbara. Shantala, do we have more live questions?
So we just have one, but I think that person is unable to. Kiran, are you there? I think Bhavna will continue with the Q&A box when they're ready to. They have been unmuted, so they can join the conversation whenever they want.
Okay. Okay. Another question for Barbara. The person is asking when he or she will apply next year in August. They will be towards end of their 3rd year post PhD and 1 year of postdoc. How will they pass the criteria by the time the fellowship will be awarded? How does the eligibility work in this scenario?
Yeah, unfortunately, if you are past the 3 years after your PhD degree, or if you have spent more than 1 year with your proposed host supervisor, you're no longer eligible. The reason why we have this rule is simply that if somebody has already a lot of experience, like 3 years post PhD and 1 year as a postdoc, it's a bit unfair to somebody who's applying right out of their PhD, because this person will always look more experienced, you know, have more data, and it just, it it's not going to be a level playing field if we allow people past that time window to apply.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Okay, I think we are at the end of our webinar. Shantala, do you want to add something?
So I just wanted to ask all of you. So we had these audience polls at the end of both of your, both of the chunks of the presentation. Is there anything you wanted to add based on that, or are there any questions that you answered in the Q&A box that you feel are worth reiterating? Because so everybody, even the people joining on YouTube, will be able to kind of get those take-home messages. So I think one thing that one question that was answered in the Q&A box was about the age restriction. So that is also often a concern for people regarding the age restriction. So go ahead,
So
Shubha.
there is no age restriction, but there is, of course, the restriction of the time after your PhD finished, but there's no age restriction. There was also another question that might be worth answering to the whole crowd, and that is by Abhishek Ghosh. Is it okay to have initial data from the host lab in the application? That is, of course, fine. You can always present what has been done in the lab and emphasize why the chosen host lab, by having done research in that field, will help you answer your specific question. That is, you can justify, of course, saying, I have this particular question in mind that I would like to answer, and the host lab is the best fit to do this because they have already acquired data or experience in that field. But it's not required.
Thanks, Barbara. Shubha, did you want to say something?
Yeah, Hiral Shah had a question about, is it a concern, is the career stage of the host supervisor a concern? You know, she worries about how the committee would look at somebody joining a very young lab and wondering whether they would be a good mentor. So I would say that I've seen all kinds of young and senior host supervisors be, I would say, rewarded with HFSP postdocs, because I think it's a real reward to actually have a talented person like this join you. I would say the mentoring ability of the young PI comes, how do you say, it reveals itself in the way they write their letter about the person. So how they write about the person is telling, is very, very telling. And by and large, I mean, you know, the HFSP tries, I think, not to discriminate against somebody just because, just as there's no age limit for the students. Yes, please, Barbara.
Yes, I would like to fully agree with that. And also don't shy away from proposing a young host lab, because oftentimes, and Anjana, I'm sure she's the greatest mentor on earth because she's young. Her lab is still relatively small. Consider that compared to a lab where there are 50 people. The mentorship there can simply not be as good, or oftentimes will not be as intense as in a smaller, younger lab, also where the supervisor is still pretty much, you know, a senior postdoc, or like pretty much in the mindset of having needed that kind of mentorship themselves. Don't shy away from young labs. Oftentimes they will provide even better mentoring for postdocs.
Sorry, may I continue on this theme? Oh, sorry, Anjana, your turn. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one more thing, maybe more in general, and it may sound, you know, floofy, but anyway, I think it's important not to tailor the application to tick a bunch of boxes like mentor status, etc. I think it's really important to identify a great question, no matter who the mentor is, where the host lab is. Those things should be secondary, really. And what should really matter is that you've identified an exciting question that you're excited to spend some time thinking about and writing about. The fellowship application process was revealing for me because it really made me think very deeply about what I'm going to do for the next few years in a postdoc, but what also I'm going to perhaps see myself doing for several years to come. And that's a phenomenal opportunity to already have. And so I would really recommend not worrying so much about how to tailor the application to fit criteria the best, but instead first identify the right question. Yeah, that's all I had to say. Thank you.
No, but so if I may say, not beyond just the HFSP postdoc mentor, I think broadly, Indian students, when they apply to labs abroad, they just go by the published papers. And they say, oh, this work is cool, I want to join. The papers are not as relevant as the way the postdoc mentor is going to mentor you and how they run their lab, how much independence they give, so you should interview your postdoc mentor. It's a bi-directional interview. If you're not comfortable with that, you're not ready to do a postdoc. And if the person is not welcoming and appreciative of this, don't join the person. Don't join somebody who feels insulted by your asking them these basic questions. That's a big red flag. Far too many Indians just unknowingly just go into this because we are far too respectful as a culture. And my God, to question, they won't take me. Well, if they won't answer your question or they won't take you because you ask them some, very reasonable questions, don't join them. That's bad for you.
Yes, fully agree.
Thank you. So on that inspiring and I guess informational note, we'll end today's webinar. Thank you so much, Barbara, Shubha and Anjana for a really, really fun and informational session. A big thank you to Guntram and Smitha as well. They had to step out for other commitments. Thank you, Manjula, who moderated the YouTube session. And also a big thank you to Bhavna, who kind of was instrumental in organizing this webinar. So with that, we're going to end this session. Thank you all for joining us. I hope that all of you found it informational or at least got started about thinking about these fellowships. It's of course, it's a bit of a journey. So you're not going to be ready to write an application at the end of this webinar, I believe, but to at least get started. Sorry, my co-host has some inputs on this session as well. Sorry. So I just want to say that please do email us with your feedback at IGAP@IndiaBioscience.org. And with that, I'll say thank you and good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice
Bye.
to meet you both, meet all three of you. And
same here.